Hey guys, this is my first ever narration of a scary story that I'm going to put on YouTube. I've been listening to these things for a number of years now, and I just thought if I enjoy them so much, why not try and create these sorts of things for other people? I'm going to start doing this as more than a hobby than anything else, but I hope you guys really do enjoy this because I know that I'm going to enjoy recording these for you guys. Anyway, we're going to jump straight into it. I'm not going to bother asking you for likes or subs or anything because it is still early days, but this is the first story I'm ever going to do. It's called I Let a Stranger Into My House Last Night, so we hope you enjoy. A man came into my house last night. I'm the one who let him in, but I don't know how or why this even happened. I know I'd never let a stranger, someone whom I've never seen or heard of before, come into my home like that. Especially at such a late hour. I'm a sensible person, just as much as anyone else. But yeah, I did let him in. There are some gaps in my memory, but I'll do my best to describe the events of last night. Maybe it'll help us get a better understanding as to what happened, but something tells me it won't even make a difference. I don't remember whether he'd knocked on the door or rang the doorbell, but then again, there's also the possibility that he didn't even do any of those things. I only recall standing in front of the door with my hand already on the doorknob, yet not quite sure how I'd even got in there in the first place, or what even prompted me to get off the couch. I was just sat there, and then I was at the door, and all I can say is that somehow I knew there was someone on the other side of the door, and they were waiting on the porch for me to let them in. I know I tried forming certain thoughts in my head, such as, what am I doing, or what's going on, but they always seemed to fizzle before completion. Instead, my actions and speech seemed to be under some sort of influence. My hand wouldn't even let go of the doorknob, eager to twist it and finally let the stranger inside. I wanted to ask, who is it? But the only thing that I blurted out was, yes? The man on the other side of the door replied immediately, as if on cue, I'm here to look at your house. There was a strange air of familiarity to his voice, and yet at the same time there was a smothering, violently uncanny aspect to it. It sounded deep yet distant, friendly but intrusive. This immediately raised some red flags, but any and all concerns I'd have would disappear just as quickly as they came. I wanted to say I'd be calling the police if he didn't leave, but I literally couldn't utter any of those words. I couldn't even say no. The more I tried to speak to my mind, the more confused it became. The effort I was making was such that I couldn't even fathom what was happening. Of course, were the words that came out of my mouth on their own. I can see him. I can visualize him in my mind, but as soon as I try picturing or describing any of his traits, I feel like something pushes me back. Something's preventing my own thoughts and memories of him becoming fully formed, and that alone is simply too terrifying to comprehend. I remember opening the door. I remember thinking, he's very tall. I didn't see his face immediately, but what I saw was his chest. He was tall. Very tall. He grabbed the top of my door frame and slightly ducked underneath as he walked into my home, before slowly closing the door behind him and locking it shut. My door frame stands at about 7 feet, and I know this because I'm the one who assembled it, and I'm 6'1". He was tall, more than I'm able to say, and his face. I know I saw it, whether willingly or not, but I can't quite tell what's wrong with it, despite knowing fully well that there was many alarming things about it. No hair, very distinctive eyes and mouth. His skin, both his tone and texture were just... maybe a mask? Was it something sewn into his skin? I can't be sure, but there was something inherently revolting and dangerous about his face, and that much I'm sure of. It made me feel this terrible uneasiness in the pit of my stomach, which was nothing but yet another thing that I couldn't voice or express no matter how much I tried. He didn't have any kind of odour attached to him, but he exuded this absolutely impenetrable, unfathomable madness of incomprehensible dimensions. Christ. I don't even know what it is I'm trying to say here, but this all sounds so insane. I don't know how long we were stood in the entryway of my home, almost in absolute darkness if it weren't for the moonlight coming from the window behind him. I know we stared at each other for a while, but I can't picture his eyes anymore. I remember only darkness, dripping, oily, smeared darkness around the corner of his eyes. "Show me where you eat," he asked. I found myself standing in the living room. The man had his back to me and slowly ran his hand on the dining table as if tracing an invisible line. I couldn't do anything but watch as I stood there, completely still, and as an unseen force prevented me from moving. "This will do," he said. "It suits you," I replied, words once again coming out of my mouth without me having to say a thing. "Show me where you sleep," he asked. Fear instantly tightened his grip on my chest. Not because I would be leading him shortly into my bedroom without being able to do a thing about it, but because my wife was sleeping on our bed. The mere thought of seeing this dark figure standing in our bedroom as she slept was simply too much to bear, but I was absolutely powerless. The next thing I recall is standing outside my bedroom. The door was wide open and I could see the man inside as he slowly approached my wife's side of the bed while she slept under those blankets. He sat right next to her as the mattress creaked under his size and weight. My wife called out to me and I could immediately tell she was terrified beyond words by the sound of her voice. I could tell that she too wasn't quite saying what she wanted to say. She wasn't moving or making any attempts to get out of bed, even in the presence of this terrifying stranger. We were both equally helpless. The man, perhaps sensing the concern we felt for one another, said to her, "Don't be upset. I came to see your house." As he said those words, his face drew closer to hers. I wanted to stop him. Entering the bedroom was all I was trying to do, but I found my hands gripping the sides of the doorframe, preventing me from taking a single step inside. Dark thoughts flashed through my mind, but when I heard him mumble some words, I was realising he was merely whispering something into her ear. I say merely because he could have done anything that he wanted to her at that point if he wanted to. And yet the words he spoke to her were just as bad as anything else. She started sobbing, slowly at first and then uncontrollably, as if an unspeakable thing had been done to her. Sobs turned into screams and screams became piercing shrieks. It was heartbreaking, and in my helplessness I found myself thinking I could just die there and then if I had the chance. I didn't understand anything anymore. Who was this man? What did he want? And what could he have possibly said to my wife to elicit such a reaction from her? I just wanted all of it to end, and that's when he turned his head to me and said, "Show me the children now." I felt my heart got caught up in my throat. I'd forgotten about the kids until he mentioned them. He stood in between their beds and my wife's violent shrieks could be heard coming from down the hall, but my kids were somehow still asleep. The strange man stood tall before me, perfectly still. He would turn his head slightly to the right and then to the left as he observed each of my two daughters for what felt like a painfully long amount of time. "Good children," he whispered. He moved without sound and stopped as he left their room to look me in the eyes once more, and we both stood out of the hallway. "Good flesh. This is a good house." His words made me snap back to reality. We were back at the entryway, but this time around I was the one with my back to the door, not him. He laid the back of his hand on my shoulder and its weight felt infinite. "You will now pass ownership of this house to me." It's not so much of what he said, but how he said it. There was a certain sense of complete and utter finality to that statement. I knew that if I gave him what he wanted, I wouldn't be forfeiting just my home, but a lot of other things as well. Maybe everything. I had to do something, and I still didn't know exactly what I had to do. There was no word for my sorry mental state at the time, so I don't think I was a conscious effort. At least not entirely. This man, he was after something. He seemed to want my house, which appeared to be good enough for him for reasons that were beyond me. But I could only say what he wanted to hear. "This is a good house," I repeated. There was a brief pause. "Yes," he said. "You deserve the best house," I continued. His face inched closer to mine as he bent over slightly. Yes. There are better houses, I said. He stopped abruptly, almost as in frozen in time for a few seconds. I remember his head producing a slight twitch, which would have gone unnoticed if he wasn't so damn close to me. Down the road, I said as I shot a look to the side. He straightened himself up, his eyes now fixated on a window behind me that I can't even remember exactly what he did then. He then moved towards a window behind me. As he did, I found that it was getting easier for me to speak on my own terms, so I kept it. Better houses, bigger families. His head slowly turned to face me once again, and I could tell he was trying to verify how factual my statements were. He walked past me and went to the window where he stood in silence. I realised then that my wife wasn't screaming anymore. I heard him mumble something, but I couldn't quite make out what he was saying except for the word skin things. He then took a few steps back before approaching the door. I will go and see more houses. He unlocked the door and opened it. I couldn't believe he was actually leaving. You can sleep for now. As he said those words, I felt a crushing wave of exhaustion suddenly coming over me. I fell to the ground, but barely registering anything as my body went numb. I saw his massive figure once again ducking under the doorframe as he stepped onto the porch. He said something else on his way out, but I wasn't able to make out what it was, nor did I care. I was just glad to see him gone. My wife startled me awake as I realised where I had fallen asleep, and the memories of the previous night slowly came to me. I hoped that it had been nothing but a nightmare, coupled with a brief sleepwalking episode, even though nothing of the sort had ever happened to me in the past. It took me just one look at her face to know that it had been real, all of it. She didn't remember much, seeing as she never left the bed, but she remembered enough. The tall man, the indescribable terror, the words that wouldn't come out and the body that wouldn't move. His face. Our daughters, on the other hand, were seemingly oblivious to everything that had transpired, so we did our best to try not to freak them out. We made sure they weren't hurt, but there was just no way we could send them off to school after what happened. We made up a lie and said the school would be closed for the day, maybe even the whole week. My wife and I sat down and we both tried to figure out what the hell happened, but we kept hitting the same mental barriers. We thought about calling the cops, but would we have even been taken seriously? We can even barely describe the man, even though his image is forever burned into our minds. The more we try discussing it, the less sense it makes, but at least we agreed on something. We're leaving today, and he won't find us here if he ever comes back. He can take his house and claim it as his own. I don't care, but that's as much as I'm willing to compromise. We'll never go through this again, not if we can help it. Who knows what he'd do to us.